the answer is, what Board said, I know, yeah, they'd like to do that. The difficulty is that simply saying you'd like to do it doesn't get it done. And what's necessary is to have a lot of money. Because there is a physical way to do it. The physical way to do it involves filling in the easement breaking up from the right of way and moving the railroad over and then having to fix it. And that is...
Yeah, that's right. Angel? We're all part of the blue shirt together. You look great, by the way.
Website. I drew a picture here of this Hopper Street thing.
I don't think you have to actually move it closer to the west side, but I think you do have to fill in something that isn't there. As I understood the presentation of it, whatever you have to do, you have to do it with a good deal of money. So, but thank you very much.
Ready?
No one is in charge of that one. No one is in charge. We called it's only going to be one of them. He can go I just hit the little thing. I think we're pretty sick.
Thanks for coming.
Is that their rail systems are 100% subsidized. 100%. As we know it, railroads this is amazing that we're going to see $5 a gallon before the year's out. These people are talking like, my God, man, you have this one. So, that it is a problem as we speak.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody wants me to take I don't want to get you flushed out. What is
We're going to go back into session here. We're missing somebody. Couple somebody.
I'm here, but I'm missing Good afternoon. Good afternoon, John.
Is that Richard?
Yep.
It's good afternoon. Yes,
it is. Okay, we're going to go to committee reports. The first one is the operator committee meeting. The operator committee met by telephone conference, went immediately into closed session, took information from legal counsel and advised legal counsel on the Novato lawsuit, and the meeting was adjourned. The Finance Committee report, Director Colfax, would you like to give that?
Yes, what's pretty much what I mentioned before is that we had a discussion of the financial...
I don't think your mic is on enough.
You're right. We had a discussion again by phone conference of the Finance Committee, and I think we got a pretty good review of the funding prospects for the agency. And the concern here was to locate new funding sources, new sources of revenue. One of the things that was raised, and one of the matters that was raised, is we have properties there that perhaps could become could be made to become the source of revenue in the near future. The problem with that is because staff is overextended with the various things it's had to deal with over the last year, especially, that it's not something we want to burden the staff with. It was unanimously recommended that we at least direct staff to see if there is someone or some group out there that might be able to be brought on on a short-term basis to see if in fact there are funding opportunities here for creating more revenue, which is obviously badly needed over the short term, if not hopefully the long term. So that's essentially the report. I briefly talked to Mitch about it this morning. Mitch, if you would comment on what, if anything, you've been able to do in the interim. It's only been 2 weeks.
Yes, thank you, Director Colfax, and thank you for that report. The one thing I would mention is that any decisions we make with respect to the property will inevitably impact the operator in terms of his operations of the railroad and also potentially his interest in property that is associated with his lease of the line. So, as I pointed out to Director Colfax, the next step would be to sit down with the operator and talk to him about the concept and how we want to proceed. And so I've discussed this with Mr. Williams, and what we'd like to do is set a meeting with him and the legal counsel and probably the project engineer and begin to see what we can do along those lines.
Thank you. Are there any questions from the board on the report? Any questions from the public? Then we'll move on to the Willits Rail Yard Ad Hoc Committee. To refresh your memories, we made a decision to again attempt to dispose of some of our surplus passenger equipment, which has been badly vandalized, in some cases burned out. And we went to a public process to invite bids. The invitations were circulated. I think we circulated them twice. And then the second time we were able to actually get some bids. We directed staff to go back and clarify some issues relative to whether they were exclusive to all the cars. Mitch, do you want to report the results of that? I think we have an action item on here.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to point out G3 is we're going to ask the board to accept the recommendation of the task force, or the Willits Rail Yard Ad Hoc Committee, I should say. And yes, we had 2 bids, and one was clearly superior to the other, and that bid is the recommendation that came out of the ad hoc committee, and as I say, that's G3 on our agenda.
Unless there's some need to, we'll save the discussion of that for when we reach that point in the agenda. There was no other action that was taking place. The idea basically is then to get this eyesore out of the city, these eyesores out of the city of Willits. They're a health and safety issue. We actually were served with legal action. We've since, mainly through Chris's good offices, have developed a real good communication with the city, and we're taking other security steps down there to make sure the cars don't get any worse, and actually work with the police department to remove the transients that are most of the problem down there. So we'll now move to conduct of business, unless there's any questions on that. The first item is the discussion and possible approval authorizing staff and operators to proceed with design, safety, and operational functional guidelines for trails. Just as a preface, this has come out as a result of a lot of the discussions we've had here, and in a conversation with staff and council, it became apparent that what we need to do is to determine from a safety standpoint with our operator and within the regulations and all the normally accepted guidelines how we respond to trail requests. And it isn't just up here in the north, it's all across the line. And we want to get a methodology and safety standards set up for the NCRA as a matter of policy that can be given to these groups so they know ahead of time what the expectations are in terms of our responsibilities for health and safety and operational issues in our obligations to running a freight and passenger railroad. So with that, we want to direct staff to work with the operator to develop these criteria and come back to the board for approval. Mitch, you can pick it up from there if you need to.
Sure. We have several examples actually of rails with trails, and without making a value judgment as to whether they are good proposals or bad proposals, we have one we have to live with in the city of Healdsburg Foss Creek Bikeway pathway. The Sonoma Marin Area Rail Transit District has proposed over the course of virtually its entire 70 miles a pathway and bikeway. Obviously, here in the city of between Eureka and Arcata is on the main line have been proposals, and there's been actually a feasibility study done by Alta Group on a proposed trail adjacent to the main line. So there are a number of studies out there, and criteria that is most interesting to us is about safety, obviously, and the CPUC is the state agency that regulates safety, so the direction we get will be largely from the CPUC. There isn't a lot of flexibility. Those issues are pretty set in stone by the CPUC. The larger question where there is some subjectivity involved, and the operator's key here is functional operability. That is, what impact might a trail adjacent to an operating railroad have on the safe operation and efficiency of the line? And so, after a number of discussions, what we thought might be a good idea, or actually might be a necessity, is to develop some guidelines that would be our best sort of assessment based on the various guidelines that are out there already. In addition to those trails that I mentioned that are being contemplated now, Metrolink in Southern California has a pathway policy for its pathways adjacent to operating railroads that we can look at. Burlington Northern Santa Fe has a policy that we can look at. That is really what we're asking the board for, is the authority to develop guidelines that would serve as our recommendation in terms of trails adjacent to operating railroads.
Can we get a motion on the floor and maybe then continue this discussion as part of the discussion?
Yeah, I move that we direct staff to come up with, or direct staff to develop design, safety, and operational functionality guidelines for trails on or near NCRA right of way.
Second.
We have a second, and now we'll open for board discussion. John?
Thank you. Yeah, I talked to Mitch about this. I'm glad he put it on the agenda for us to consider, because I discovered this is a lack. Without these guidelines, we're giving people some unclear direction, I think, at this point. I walked the Arcata example inside the city limits, where the city is interested in developing along the right-of-way a trail that would run from basically Sunset Avenue, or near where the skateboard park is, through the town, Shea Park, and connect to the main line. So it'd be part of that spur that runs on out to where the Humboldt Flakeboard plant is. So we were wrestling with how to look at things, and we were trying to use like a general mark of about a 15-foot from center line, but even that may not be appropriate. But it needs to be started anyway, and I think as much as a guideline, it's also a procedure. We need what steps organizations need to take, what kind of demonstration of abilities do they have to operate a trail, things like that should also be included, so they know what to expect if they want to take off and develop a trail. Maps, also, things like that. So I'm glad we're moving forward with this, and the sooner the better.
I have a question that hasn't been answered, and I can deal with safety, the design, all that. Who's in charge of cleanup of the functional trail once it is in place? Who is responsible? And I mean, I'm assuming there would be some cleanup.
Well, I think that would be one of the issues that would be addressed in this policy. This is what really is sadly lacking, and why there's been frustration on the part of applicants for this, that we haven't been able to answer even the simplest questions. We haven't answered them for ourselves yet. So I think that would be part of the answer. Okay.
Maybe we could appoint John Murray, who was as the functional director of that project, because he has I'm retired also, by the way, John. That he has all this time on his hands.
You got time, maybe you could go out there with him with a bag.
Oh, yeah, sure.
No, we have to deal with that as a policy issue first.
There's a policy, I think that it's going to be a costly one.
Thank you. John?
To follow up on Charles, and I'm sure those of us in public positions know about that very same question. It is one thing to build it, it's another thing to maintain it, and that's always been the problem. So when we have cities willing to take it on, then they're able to absorb that risk and functionality. But when we have it in unincorporated areas, and we don't have the county budget per se, then that becomes more difficult to identify. But we still have to go through the process of trying to help some folks be identified.
If you ever go to France, see people with a blue uniform, it's a coverall, this French blue. They're on public assistance, and they're making like 14, 15 bucks an hour. They make it attractive, but they have to work for their money. They don't have that. The project where with our orange uniforms that we see people on the highway, those people make a wage actually.
Yeah, sure. Other directors? Go ahead, Tom.
I just had a question on where in this process or where does SMART fit? Can we expand on that a little bit? Are they going to be consulted in this process? Are we proposing, I mean, as is mentioned in here, they have plans for trails along their right-of-way. Would we have separate requirements? Would we track with them? And I know we don't have to resolve that now.
Yeah.
But in this process, are we going to work with them on that?
Well, I think their input, they will give us their input, I'm quite certain of that. But my assumption is that John Williams and Dave Anderson and Chris and I and probably others will sit down and develop criteria, and then SMART will have an opportunity to have input or react to the criteria we develop.
It may be the other way around. You know, SMART owns that section of the railroad, and they've gone pretty far in their own plans, and unfortunately, there already appears to be some differences in terms of the safety issues, and there has to be a meeting of the minds on that. I think the important thing is the NCRA has to decide for both the parts of the railroad that it owns and the parts of the railroad it's responsible for operationally, what its policy is. If it doesn't meet with another group, then we have to sit down with that group, and the only other group is SMART, and say, here is our policy, and here's where it differs with yours. How do we resolve this? And, you know, again, we've had good relationships with them, and this is one of many challenges we'll have as we both kind of move toward our various goals and points where they align and where perhaps they don't. It's a negotiating issue. Any other comments, Heather?
I don't have a comment, except I'm not sure that the motion included the staff working in conjunction with the operator. And maybe Heather has that, but if it didn't, I think we should include it. If it did, I apologize.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I meant to read it because I was taking it right from the agenda item as it reads, and it has operator in it, staff and operator. So if I left it out, I apologize, but wanted to make sure it was included.
Are there any comments from the public on this matter? John, did you have anything to say, or your input's in here? So. Thank you. I'm going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? It carries unanimously. Thank you. Item 2. Mitch, you want to pick up on that?
Sure, and I'll turn it over quickly to Dave. This relates to consideration of a memorandum of understanding with the city of Petaluma. Basically, the NCRA SMART, the city of Petaluma, and the California Public Utilities Commission have all agreed that in the interest of safety, among other things, it would be advisable to close the at-grade Hopper Street crossing in the city of Petaluma and exchange it with the Caulfield crossing located about a half-mile north of there. The memorandum of understanding before you basically stipulates that NCRA will contribute the amount that was originally budgeted in TCRP funds for the Hopper Street repairs, and which is amount of about $150,000. And the City Redevelopment Agency, the City of Petaluma Redevelopment Agency, will cover all of the other costs of designing and constructing a new crossing at Caulfield. I know Dave has met with HDR, who is the engineer for SMART, and with Petaluma Public Works Department. He and I have both met a couple of times with them, and I think he can answer any questions. I think Director Myers had a couple of questions that Dave also has hopefully answered.
Go ahead.
Okay, well, I'm just here to answer questions, but I would like to just make a simple statement that the city, the PUC, the city's engineers, our engineers, SMART have all worked for about a year on this, and it really addresses, and the operator, it addresses a significant safety issue. Everybody's on board, and the advantage to NCRA is the city is putting up about $1.3 million that is going to be spent on the railroad, and we're only spending $150,000 that we would have spent anyways to get a great safety improvement. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to try to answer.
Why don't we see if we can get a motion on the floor here first?
So moved.
Second.
Open for discussion. John?
What's the source of the 150,000?
TCRT.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Bernie?
First of all, thank you very much to both Dave and Angel, who both on Saturday and yesterday answered most of the questions, and also got something from Petaluma that's going to assist us in just a moment. Should we have the city as a party to the agreement? I throw that out either Dave or Chris or somebody else.
Right. I'd like to have Angel come up here and help with some of these questions as well, because she, like you said, she actually authored most of this. But the city is not paying for this. This is really coming out of the community development district, redevelopment fund. So they're not involved from a financial standpoint.
Who issues the permits? Is it the city or the district?
The city will be issuing the permits. And in fact, they already have.
Okay. And do we want SMART to be a party to the agreement? And I would say look at paragraph 6 of page 5, which deals with the fact that we're interacting with SMART.
SMART, as I stated, has been very much involved, very much in favor, and quite frankly, they would rather not. I mean, this really doesn't involve them other than it's their property, but as far as the financial arrangement, it doesn't involve them, and they would rather not be involved.
And Chris, are you satisfied that we don't need them as a signatory to the agreement?
Yes, they approved it. Recital E says that SMART has stated support by a letter dated October 9th.
Okay. I want to make sure that, in fact, the issue that John Woolley talked about is covered. We're putting in up to and not more than $150,000. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So, as Angel and I and you discussed recently, could we make sure that the language of the agreement says that?
Yeah, I'll let Angel answer that.
Yeah, I spoke with the city, and they are very agreeable to adding language either to the attachment 1 or in that change order section that specifically says that, you know, when they agree to a change order, that means that they are agreeing to pay that extra cost.
I'm going to ask that, as you see fit, that we add it to either. I think it's best in the main agreement itself, but up to you. There's a provision here that says that if there's a problem, the parties will work in good faith to resolve discrepancies. That's page 4, item 5. It doesn't say anything about what if there's no resolution, and is there, it doesn't say anything about a time limit of resolution, nor does it say whether NCRA is to pay initially and then get reimbursed, or Petaluma is to pay and then seek reimbursement from NCRA. And I understand, actually, after discussing with Angel, that NCRA pays and then would be out the money unless and until Petaluma gives us back the money. And I'd like to, if possible, change that around so that if there's a dispute, we do our best to resolve the discrepancy, but in the interim, that NCRA not be out over $150,000.
I think that they would be. I talked to our city representative there that's been working closely with us on this, and he said that he thought something like that would be very workable. Also, we thought what we could do is further define what these disputes could be about, and the most damaging dispute would be that we are requesting funding from the city of Petaluma for some sort of track improvement, say, that they say, well, this doesn't benefit city of Petaluma. But so long as this cost is part of our overall rehabilitation contract, the cost would be something that would be very eligible to be funded through our TCRP program, because our scope within TCRP covers, this rehabilitation. So it's sort of, as I started thinking about this more after we had talked, I thought, oh, this is sort of a non-issue, so long as, we're, in which, of course, we're making every effort to make sure that our contractors are doing what they're supposed to be doing, of course. And so the cost that would be disputed, if the city of Petaluma felt that this was not appropriate to be on their nickel, the other thing would be, so long as it's within the cost estimate shown in attachment 1, it would be something that they would pay for. But I like your idea of this not in excess of $150,000, that we would not be, while we solve the dispute. And also we thought we would add a time limit, a 60 or 90-day time limit.
Thank you. The top paragraph of page 5 talks about who is responsible for normal maintenance, and that got me to thinking about, is there a question as to who is responsible for abnormal maintenance, for maintenance that isn't usual? Say a tanker truck goes across the grade crossing and explodes. And I wondered whether there's some way to deal with that.
We talked about this a little bit, Ernie. And if a tanker blew up and took out our signals, we would have to go after the firm that owned the tanker. That would be an insurance issue. That wouldn't be a city of Petaluma issue.
Well, I gave that to you the other day because to me that's abnormal. I don't know what. I haven't been in the business long enough to figure out what non-normal maintenance is.
Right.
But I know that if the agreement talks about our being responsible for normal, or somebody else being responsible for normal maintenance, then it occurs to me that someone other than NCRA may be responsible for maintenance beyond.
Right. I think it was just a term we pulled out that maybe it wasn't quite the right term, but we're responsible for maintaining these signals after they're done, regardless of whether or not it's normal or abnormal. So we're just responsible for maintenance. Maybe that's what we should have just said. Take out normal.
Okay, and do we have to be concerned at all about the fact that SMART may not have funding for a number of years? For example, that it may not go to the ballot in November, or if it does, it may not pass. Do we have to be concerned that it doesn't have funding to do whatever might be required of it under this agreement?
There is no money required from SMART under this agreement. This is all the $150,000 that was going to go to Hopper through TCRP, and all of the rest of the funding comes from the city of Petaluma, about $1.3 million to be exact.
Okay.
It's irregardless if SMART ever comes to agreement.
So the only thing SMART has to do is approve the permits and what?
Yes, and they've already given us our right of entry, and they've also approved the signal plans.
Great. Last then, Angel, we talked yesterday about the contingency items on attachment 1. Is that taken care of?
Yes, I talked with the city, and one thing to point out, there's 3 items that don't show, or well, there's 2 construction items that don't show contingency amounts. And the first construction item will actually be handled by the city. They will be taking that out to construction themselves. We won't have anything to do with that. And then the second construction item, design and construct approaches to connect the Caulfield Crossing surface. Help me here. Does the city do that?
The city does that.
That's what I thought. I just wanted to confirm. So the city is also in charge of this construction item, and we will not be seeking reimbursement for this. So that was why he did not add in a contingency when he added these numbers in. It's like, well, you know, that's our problem to deal with on the PCDC side, on the Petaluma Community Development Commission side. So we will not be we won't be billing them for that.
There's at page 4, paragraph C at the very top, there's a sentence that is not in the English language. It reads, designed by PCDC, design and construction paid by PCDC, attachment 1 with construction by NCRA. Could you just clean that up?
Certainly.
Thank you. I'm going to support the motion with the slight changes that I have to make.
Any other comments from board members or questions? Go ahead, Tom.
Just for clarification, are those issues that Bernie mentioned part of the motion?
I was going to ask that question to the maker in a second. Are you okay with including those adjustments? Or amend the motion? Somebody did.
I believe Director.
Oh, I may have made it.
Okay, well then,
I'd like
pretty simple.
to.
Then
I'd like to
you
amend.
have amended your motion as stated, and who was the second on that?
That was Mr. Chairman, and as long as that language is agreeable to the city as per staff's statement. So yes, I will.
Are there any questions or comments from the public? Staff?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point one thing out, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Dave and Angel. The city of Petaluma, on behalf of the redevelopment agency, has to take this up at their council meeting, and they may recommend some, what we're told are minor changes. And I guess I would like authority from the board if we, as staff, deem their recommendations to be technical or minor, if we can go ahead and make them.
I'd add that to my motion.
I would add that to the second. It seems reasonable since they're allowing us to make some minor and acceptable changes.
Okay. I think we've got that all nailed down. I don't see any questions from the public. Let's call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Item
Mr.
3.
Chairman?
Yes.
Might we add that we're very appreciative to the effort of the city of Petaluma and the redevelopment commission, or whatever it's called, with respect to this?
Yeah, that be conveyed back to them. Okay, item G3, we talked about this in the committee reports. Do you want to report out the staff recommendation and the ad hoc committee's recommendation?
Sure. On May 5th, the Ad hoc Village Yard Committee reviewed the 2 bids received on April 16th and recommended acceptance of the bid by Alco Iron and Metal of $22,250 for the acquisition and removal of 5 rail cars.
Just to be clear, they're paying us that money to do that work.
Correct. That is correct. We will then give it to the state, unfortunately.
Not all of it. One of the cars was not purchased with state money. That goes back to the Beecham Fund.
Yes, that is correct.
And to that point, Mitch, if I can interrupt you, I've also directed staff to entertain a conversation with Caltrans to find out if we could trade those dollars into some other asset that would make them comfortable that they could leave the money with us. It may be a long shot, but it's worth the question.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say that Chris has spent a whole lot of time dealing with the city of Willits, and Heather's also spent a lot of time on this, and I think though this does not remove all of the rail cars, it removes all that we have an interest in, and I think goes a long way towards showing our good faith with the city of Willits.
Mr. Chairman, I would move approval of the acceptance of Alco's bid of $22,250 for the purchase and removal of 5 rail cars from the Willits Yard.
Second. Any further discussion or questions from the board? Tom?
We've been given this other quote by John Clark's private rail cars, and I note that on the 4th item, his bid for that 4th car is slightly higher than Alco Irons. Would you want to consider letting him have that 4th car?
We tried to do that, but Alco would not remove that from their bid. It was all or nothing. That did come up, and the answer was no. So we didn't want to risk losing the sale of the other cars. Any other questions? Any questions from the public on this matter? Yes.
You mentioned that this wasn't all of the rail cars and there was another one that would go someplace else. Could you clarify?
Well, there's another one that was burned that was purchased with different money. It depends upon the color of the money as to where the funds have to go that come in from this. So of the cars that were sold, one was purchased with NCRA funds rather than Prop 116 funds. There are a number of other cars that the railroad is holding that could have future use. We've conferred with the operator, and we're removing the most damaged cars that are creating a liability for us, and we're still holding on to a number of other cars in the hope that they could be refurbished for excursion service on one end of the line or the other.
Thank you.
Is there any other public comment or questions? I'm going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we've approved the sale of the rail cars. Item G4, the budget. I don't know how you guys want to handle this, the chair or staff, or you're the David, either way.
I think here we had a pretty good review, and so Rich, if you'd like to pick up the high points, you had it before you with considerable heat.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director Colfax. On April 30th, the Finance Committee met. We did have an extensive discussion of the agency budget as well as our long-term debt and our 2 capital budgets, which are the TCRP capital budget and the budget we have with Fish and Game to undertake the dewatering project in Shellville. With respect to the agent, and I hope that the memo I provided highlights the major issues relative to our budget. I guess I would just say in summarizing that memo that our agency budget is really unchanged, but for 2 things on the revenue side that are relatively recent, which are quite important. The advanced lease payments that the operator has been making since about October, November of 2007 of $20,000 a month. That amounts to 1/3 of our agency budget, so it's obviously very critical. And then along about December of 2005, we began leasing 35 rail cars. That makes another 1/3 of our budget. And then the the final component is the lease of property that Director Colfax has mentioned, and that we need to, if at all possible, accentuate as best we can, add to. With regard to long-term debt, in the almost 4.5 years, going on 5 years that I have been the executive director, we've actually made some progress in removing long-term debt. The Q fund loan, which is the biggest obligation we had of about 10.7 million, is, thanks to Congressman Mike Thompson, is no longer an obligation of ours. In addition to that, Angel Lucero did a lot of work on this FEMA community redevelopment or community disaster assistance grant, thank you, and of over $600,000, which FEMA has forgiven because we met their criteria finally. The only obligation...
I think their criteria was that you had to be broke and could never pay it back.
I wasn't going to mention that in the criteria. Yeah, for the previous 3 years from the time you took the loan, or I should say the subsequent 3 years after you took the loan, you had to establish that. So the only obligation that we have added in the 4.5 years I've been here is the $170,000 loan from the Harbor District, thanks to the good work of Director Olivier. And that was at a time in December of 2005, right after, or October rather of 2005, right after Governor Deukmejian vetoed our bill that would have allowed us to use the remainder of funds that were to be used to pay off the federal loan. Between that and the fact that we hadn't finalized the FEMA grant and therefore the lease of the rail cars, we had a period of time there where we were in very dire straits, and thank goodness the Harbor District helped us out. But we're on much better ground now, thanks to John Williams, thanks to the rail cars, and if we can make some progress with the property, as Director Colfax points out, our goal is to have an agency budget of about $1 million a year, and if we can achieve that eventually, we will be fine, and that is our goal.
Questions of the board? Go ahead, Tom.
Mitch, when I first came on the board, there was an account with the state for signal crossings, I think it was. And because we weren't operational then, they took those funds away, I believe, about $115,000, I think was the neighborhood. Could we start going back to them and seeing what steps we have to take to get those funds back in our hands?
Yeah, I believe those are Section 130 funds from the PUC. They're formula funds based on the number of crossings. But those funds will go to the operator for maintenance of the crossings.
Other questions of the board? Bernie?
Alan, might I suggest, and to Mitch as well, when we go to Caltrans or wherever it was that we were asking for, and suppose the cars are concerned, that we ask as well to be able to get the money far more quickly and or directly from Caltrans to pay the bills, so that the money that we're getting from Mr. Williams and the NWP doesn't have to incur the interest, because a huge chunk of our budget goes to paying interest. And in my view, he's entitled to it since he has to borrow the money himself. And if he didn't borrow it, he'd put it in and get the money anyway, the interest anyway. So if we can get off the list where Caltrans doesn't pay us the money, we're miles ahead, so to speak. And the other is, I certainly do appreciate what the Harbor District did several years before I was here. The Harbor District has now lost the funding that it would have gotten from 1B if our request had gone through. Is there some way that we can assist the Harbor District in getting its dredging efforts going. I know that's not directly on our agenda today, but I put it out there because the Harbor District has been mentioned, and it seems to me we should go the extra miles.
Director Woolley's probably best at.
We were going to try and meet while staff were here with Dave Hall and other board members that were relevant to that question, but the Army Corps of Engineers have decided to visit and going over a lot of those issues, so there's no time with this trip. But we should try and get us back on track with the committee efforts that we had at a certain point, and that could be one of the questions we bring up.
It came up also, I think, Mitch, you called me a month or so ago on this question, and they were trying to salvage something out of the wreckage of the denial of our joint application, and the question came up whether the NCRA would support them in their singular one. Without even going to the board, I said we absolutely would if it came up something that required a policy decision here, but we have a record of being in support of them, and it would be inconsistent with that if we didn't support them. I don't think it got them more than a cup of coffee over there yet, but you might be able to elaborate on that.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was going to point out earlier when the issue came up that I think if David Hall from the Harbor District were here, he would tell you that they haven't given up on that Prop 1B application, and that the shoaling component of it, they're working with the CTC, and it may in fact be some kind of a budget item in this year's budget if they can work it. So they have not given up at all on the Prop 1B application.
And I can't concede that we wouldn't support that.
Due to the quality of our friendship, and we do have a good one. I'm no longer a harbor commissioner, by the way, but I was deeply involved at all times with the port, and so is the railroad, because we're the perfect marriage. The port will not be back until we're back. So, but it was. I was working with John Woolley at the time, since I had a conflict of interest in securing the money. However, John did most of the legwork. Okay, I was the front man for John, but it all worked out. But we were delighted with the idea, and I'm still delighted with the idea that if we were a rich agency, that we would loan money to another agency that is in trouble financially. That I think we should all do that. All public agencies should work together, not only with the moral interest, but I think with the financial interest as well.
The French government.
Absolutely, that is a pretty liberal statement coming from the French. But the thing that they do have in France, and I'll be just 1 second, all the railroads in France are totally subsidized. They never lose money, even though they lose billions every year. They never worry about losing anything, because the government will, the people. That's the only difference that the French are different from the citizens of this country, is that in this country, the citizens are afraid of the government, and in France it's just the opposite. The government is afraid of the people. So that's the difference. And I would urge this government to support us so we can operate again. Mr. Chairman, I'll shut up.
Thank you, Charles, for the civics lesson.
Okay.
Okay. Is there any further comment on the budget from the public, or any questions?
I have a comment, if it would be, for the record, at the symposium that the Harbor District put on the end of April, I think it was, Mr. John Barnett was there for both days, and he heard from a lot of people that talked to him about the importance of the railroad, from myself and several other of our folks that were there. And he also heard from the trails people. So I think further communication whenever you can, and when, that it seems appropriate. Hang in there with Mr. Barnett.
Oh, Mitch Stogner is kind of joined at the hip with him whenever he can be. So
Apparently Dave Ho is also because of goods movement. Yeah. And so if we could maybe have I'm not going to say it in public.
The problem with Mr. Barnett is he doesn't have any money either. Truly, I mean, other than dispensing the 1B things, the CTC has a huge challenge in terms of just funding pothole repair right now. So. Bertie?
for council, are we okay to, we're approving this budget or we're accepting it?
Yeah, it's a draft budget that we are, yes.
I was concerned about the approval because it's a negative at the end of the day. We're saying we're going to take in X and we're going to spend X plus A, where A is a positive integer. Can we do that as a public agency?
Well, you have to take into account the fact that we're not a city or a county or a school district which has a constitutional requirement to have a balanced budget. In fact, we're not even required to have a budget. What we're required to have is a statement of anticipated revenues and a statement of anticipated expenditures. That's the extent of the obligation. There's a constitutional provision that requires much greater detail for agencies which receive that form of taxation.
Thank you.
We have a public comment question.
I just have a couple of quick comments. When I was looking over the financials and in the liabilities, I didn't see the Prop 160 payments. I didn't see that in there.
Yeah. That is a very good point. LaShara, maybe you should identify yourself.
Yeah, so we get
sorry.
on tape.
I'm LaShara Ward with Caltrans.
Yeah.
I'm your grants manager.
We know who you are, but the tape doesn't.
No, I didn't.
I'm sorry, I was going to say that was an oversight, plain and simple. We are, and I think you can confirm that we have an agreement to repay an audit exception under Prop 116, and we've made those payments in a timely fashion, and I believe, Heather, that we just unfortunately inadvertently left it off the list. Isn't that right?
Are you talking about the long-term debt list?
On both. I was looking through them all. I didn't see it anywhere.
It's listed in this item, 7930.
7930. Okay.
So apologize before you know it. Got it.
Well, except that it's not specifically
It's not
identified. It doesn't say Prop 160.
Okay, well, maybe we can highlight that a little bit.
Also, to address Bernie Meyer's question about speeding up the process for the invoices, we tried that. We did everything that we could, and we are doing it as fast as we can. So that's in the program supplement, just so you know.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah, they have done well too to speak to that. And we've been getting not as fast as we like. Part of the problem is ourselves, we're on a reimbursement basis, not an expenditure. You know, we have to show that we've done it.
Well, I was concerned about that in the MOU as well. I understand it.
Other questions, Tom?
I have one question. And I actually emailed Heather on it. She gave me a response, and I'm kind of dense enough that I didn't understand the response, so I'll ask it. We currently incur on the $3 million of debt to the NWP, by my estimate, probably $15,000 to $20,000 a month in interest expense. That's somewhat of a guess, but and is that someplace in this budget? Now, we all hope that that goes away fairly soon, that the $3 million gets paid down, but we're fast approaching the next fiscal budget year, and I would anticipate that some of that would continue, hopefully minimal. Is that in the budget? Have we budgeted for that in the coming year? Because at that amount, you know, and hopefully we don't have to pay that for the whole year, but that's 12 times 15, that's $300,000 to $400,000 a year of interest expense. If 300,000 to 400,000, probably more like 200,000 somehow. But it's a lot of money, and it's in the budget.
I think I know the answer. I'll let Mitch handle it. I think it has to do with the type of accounting we do.
Well, actually, I was going to say, Mr. Chairman, that just to be clear, this is the bridge loan, since Caltrans is a reimbursement program. Mr. Williams' financing pays the vendor, Caltrans, LaShara, then reimburses us. And there's some lag time. And that interest is applied during that lag time. And The memorandum of understanding we have with Mr. Williams, the October 07 MOU, gives us the arrangement we have with Mr. Williams is those interest payments will be credited against his future lease payments. And so it isn't a current obligation of the NCRA.
And the principal amount, the $3 million, will go away when the last dollar comes in from Caltrans reimbursement. So
yes.
This is not an ongoing debt which will keep accruing interest. But I know where he's coming from. In a normal business world where we live, you'd be accruing this as a liability.
Right, and I think in response to Director McDonald, Heather has shown where she will list that, so we have an ongoing knowledge of what that interest amount is. But Mr. Williams, under his lease, has an obligation to pay lease payments to the NCRA once he gets operational. The arrangement we have with Mr. Williams is that these interest amounts will be credited against those lease payments.
Okay, I now understand it, and I agree with the chairman that in our private world, we'd be accruing that on a monthly basis or something. On an accrual accounting basis, we would be recognizing that as an expense. On a cash basis, it's not an expense.
That's correct. But it could be if there were a default of some type. I mean, there's other portions of our memorandum that if the NCRA doesn't deliver on it is in fact a liability, and we shouldn't treat it as anything but a liability, aside from our expectation of future lease revenue. The fact that we don't have to count for it doesn't mean that we shouldn't recognize it and understand it.
And I'm not sure that when our CPA at the end of the year does accrual accounting, that they might recognize it as an expense.
Well, I think they understand it. He's sitting in the back raising his hand.
We are accruing it already. It's not 15,000. We're making monthly interest accruals in the books, right?
So on our audited financials, it'll show as a liability at year end?
Yes.
Okay.
And does. I mean, there's...
But it's not a cash event in the sense that it has any effect on the budget that we're doing now. John?
The discussion we had a little bit about the deficit ties in a bit to some of the ideas that were also presented of how to overcome that. In particular is the lease revenues. I'm curious, the $230,000 we're projecting as property lease revenues, is that in a sense the totality of all lease revenues, or is that what we expect and we still have on the books unpaid lease revenues that are not measured?
The lease revenues, they're showing the as of March 31st 08 number. That's as of March 31st.
Those are actuals.
That is an actual number. I don't know if it'll reach 230,000, but it'll be pretty close by year end.
So then there's lease revenues that we're not pulling in that are owed to us, and do we know?
Owed to us and are currently being billed.
I see. And what would that total be about if we were?
40,000.
40,000.
Outstanding right now.
Thank you.
You know, I think, again, we've gone both ways. We've had professional management of this in the past, and we've also tried to do it with staff, and there's problems on either side of it. I think taking another look at this, particularly in light of the staff loads and everything else, if we could find some professional management for this, where even after they took their cut, the pie would be larger. I think the Finance Committee has pointed us at something we should look at, and it's no reflection on Heather. I think she's done a really good job on it, but real estate isn't her priority, or not her priority is not the right word, it's not her expertise. It's what she has done as a good scout for us.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I would move approval of Resolution 2008-04.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion from the board? Any questions from the public? Call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, that stands unanimously. We now go to the consent calendar. Can we have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Second. Any discussion on the consent calendar? Bernie?
for the approval of the minutes of the meeting of April 9, that's H.A. I would like to amend or add, or however you do it, to add the corrections suggested by both Director McDonald